My teenage daughter posted my paycheck online to embarrass me. So I showed her exactly what that paycheck paid for. The screenshot had 47,000 views before I even woke up. My daughter, Mackenzie, had posted my pay stub to her Instagram story at 2 a.m., crying laughing emojis, and the caption, "No wonder we're poor. This is what my mom makes working 50 hours a week. Embarrassing." The image showed my full name, my hourly rate of $18.40, and my gross pay of $1,847 for 2 weeks of work at Lakeside Regional Medical Center, where I'd been a certified nursing assistant for 11 years. Her 2,300 followers had seen it. Friends screenshotted it. Someone reposted it to a local gossip account with the caption, "Imagine working this hard for this little." By 8 a.m., my phone was blowing up with notifications from coworkers asking if I was okay. My supervisor, Renata, pulled me into her office before my shift even started, her face tight with concern and something else I couldn't quite name. She shut the door behind me and pulled up her own phone, showing me the screenshot now circulating through the hospital staff. I sat in that office chair, feeling my chest tighten as I scrolled through the comments. Some people were defending me, saying nursing assistants were underpaid and overworked. Others were laughing, calling me a loser who should have gone to college, asking who stays in the same dead-end job for over a decade. Renata told me the hospital's HR department was already aware and trying to figure out if this violated any policy, since it showed my full legal name and the facility's information. I couldn't speak. I just stared at my own salary on that screen. The number I'd always felt ashamed of, now broadcast to thousands of strangers. Renata asked if I needed to go home. I shook my head because I couldn't afford to lose a shift. Every hour counted. Every hour always had. I walked onto the floor at 7:32, badge clipped to my scrubs, my heart sitting somewhere between my ribs and my throat. Mrs. Alvarez in room 304 needed to be turned and cleaned. Mr. Whitfield in 308 was calling for pain medication again. Hospital life didn't stop just because my 16-year-old daughter decided to humiliate me online. I changed adult diapers and monitored vitals and helped patients to the bathroom while my phone kept buzzing in my pocket with every new comment and share. On my lunch break, the post had been taken down from Mackenzie's account, but the damage was already done. Screenshots live forever. I sat in the break room with a sandwich I couldn't taste, watching a younger nursing assistant named Yolanda scroll her phone and then look up at me with that particular expression people get when they've just seen something about you online. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. The sit-down I called Mackenzie during my 15-minute break, standing in the stairwell where no one could hear me. She picked up on the fourth ring with a sigh so dramatic I could picture her rolling her eyes. I asked her what she'd been thinking, posting my personal information like that. She said it wasn't personal because everyone already knew we were poor anyway. Said her friend's parents made way more money and she was tired of being the poor girl in the group. Said maybe if I'd done something with my life instead of wiping butts for a living, she wouldn't be so embarrassed to be my daughter. I stood in that stairwell listening to my own daughter talk to me like I was nothing, like the sacrifices I'd made, the shifts I worked sick, the overtime I picked up to pay for her cheer classes and her braces and her phone. Didn't matter at all. The line went dead before I could respond. She'd hung up on me. I finished my shift at 7 p.m., 12 hours after starting, and drove home in the dark. My apartment building looked the same as always. 3 floors of beige stucco, the management never maintained. I climbed the stairs to Unit 214 and walked in to find Mackenzie on the couch, watching TikTok with her headphones in, completely indifferent to the destruction she'd caused that day. The apartment was small, just 2 bedrooms, a bathroom, and a kitchen that opened into the living room. I'd lived here since Mackenzie was 4, since her father, Travis, walked out and left me with a small child and $19,000 in credit card debt he'd racked up without telling me. I dragged us out of that hole one paycheck at a time. I'd worked doubles and triples, missed her school plays and her cheer showcases because I was picking up extra shifts to keep a roof over our heads and food on the table. And this was how she repaid me. I stood in the doorway of our apartment, watching my daughter laugh at something on her phone, completely oblivious to my presence, and made a decision. I didn't yell, I didn't cry, I just walked into the kitchen, pulled out a notebook, and started writing. The next morning was Saturday, and Mackenzie slept until noon like always. I was up at 6 a.m. because my body didn't know how to sleep in, not after 11 years of morning shifts. I sat at the kitchen table with my notebook and a calculator, working through numbers I'd never shared with her. When she finally emerged from her room around 12:30, hair tangled, phone already in hand, she found me waiting. The kitchen table was covered in papers, bank statements, bills, receipts from the last 3 months. She looked at the mess and asked what was going on, her voice carrying that edge of teenage irritation that had become her default setting. I told her to sit down. She rolled her eyes and said she was meeting Paige at the mall in an hour. I told her to sit down again. Something in my voice must have shifted because she actually listened. She dropped into the chair across from me, still holding her phone, waiting with obvious impatience for the lecture she assumed was coming. But I didn't give her a lecture. I slid the first paper across the table. "This is our rent," I said. $14.50 a month. I pointed to the line item on my bank statement showing the automatic debit. "This apartment, these 2 bedrooms, the roof over your head, that's $725 per paycheck. Almost half of what you saw on that pay stub you posted." Mackenzie blinked at the paper but didn't answer. I slid the next document over. "This is our electric bill. $129 last month, which is actually low because I keep the thermostat at 78 to save money. Even though I know you complain about the heat, this is the internet bill. $65 a month, which you need for homework but also for all the streaming you do. This is my car payment. $287 a month for the Nissan that takes you to school and cheer, and your friends' houses. This is car insurance. $96 a month, which went up after I added you as a driver. This is the gas I put in that car. About $200 a month depending on prices. Are you following me so far?" Mackenzie's expression shifted from irritation to something harder to read. She set her phone face down on the table, common enough for me to notice. I kept going. "This is the grocery bill," I said, sliding over receipts from last month. $512 total in April. That includes the almond milk you like, even though regular milk is half the price. The organic chicken because you decided you don't eat conventional meat anymore. The protein bars you take to school. The energy drinks I told you not to buy that ended up in the cart anyway. This is my phone bill. $145 a month for both our lines, including your unlimited data plan you said you'd die without. This is your cheer gym membership. $165 a month for the competition team you begged me to let you join. This is the cost of your last competition, which included the registration fee, the uniform, the hotel room since it was 2 hours away, and the meals we ate. For one weekend." Mackenzie's face was pale. She was staring at the receipts like she'd never seen them before, which she probably hadn't because I'd always shielded her from the financial reality of our lives. I kept pulling papers from the stack. Health insurance, car maintenance, the co-pays for the therapy sessions I'd started taking her to last year when she was struggling with anxiety, the cost of her prescription medication, the dentist, the eye doctor, the new glasses she'd needed in January. I added it all up for her. Every month, our basic expenses totaled roughly $3,650. My net pay after taxes and deductions was about $2,900 a month. Mackenzie stared and asked how we weren't homeless. I explained that I picked up overtime whenever I could, sometimes working 60 hours a week instead of 40. I explained that I hadn't bought myself new clothes in 2 years, that I cut my own hair, that I made my own coffee instead of buying it, that I brought lunch every day while coworkers ordered delivery. I explained that my phone was 4 years old and cracked but still worked. I explained that I'd been putting off my own dental work because I couldn't afford the copay. I explained that the last time I went to a movie theater was when she was in middle school. I explained that I drove a 10-year-old car with 138,000 miles on it because I couldn't afford anything newer. I explained that every financial decision I made was calculated against whether it would keep us afloat or push us under. And then I asked her a question. I asked where she thought the money came from for everything she enjoyed. The cheer, the phone, the almond milk, the DoorDash order she made when I was at work, the Amazon packages that showed up at our door, all of it. Mackenzie didn't answer. Her eyes were wet, but she wasn't crying yet. I wasn't finished. I pulled out one more document, something I'd printed at the library the night before. It was an itemized breakdown of everything I'd spent on her over the past 12 months. Cheer alone was $3,400, including membership, competitions, uniforms, and travel. The iPhone she'd demanded last fall because her old phone was embarrassing was $1,100 with the case and screen protector. Her clothes were easily $950 over the year, despite her complaints that she never had anything to wear. The makeup and skincare products she ordered online, maybe $380. The school trips, the sophomore year photos she wanted even though it wasn't a milestone year, the formal dress, the escape room birthday party with her friends. I added it all up. Approximately $7,200 spent specifically on Mackenzie in the last 12 months, on top of basic necessities like food and shelter. I asked her to look at that number and then to look at my annual salary, which after overtime maybe hit $37,000 before taxes. I asked her to calculate what percentage of my income went directly toward making her life comfortable, while I worked myself to exhaustion and went without so she wouldn't have to. She finally broke. The tears came in a flood, and she put her head down on the table, among all those papers and receipts, sobbing in a way I hadn't seen since she was a little girl. Part of me wanted to comfort her, wanted to pull her into my arms and tell her it was okay, that I'd always take care of her, that she didn't need to worry about money because that was my job. But I'd been doing that for 16 years, and all I'd gotten was a daughter who thought my salary was embarrassing content for social media. I sat there and waited. The mall trip wasn't happening. Paige would have to wait. After maybe 10 minutes, Mackenzie lifted her head. Her mascara was smeared down her face, her nose running, and she looked nothing like the polished, confident teenager who'd posted that screenshot. She looked like a scared kid who just realized the ground under her wasn't as solid as she thought. She asked why I'd never told her any of this. I said, because I wanted her to have a normal childhood, to not worry about money the way I worried about it every single day of her life. I said I thought protecting her from financial stress was good parenting, but I was starting to think I'd made a mistake. Mackenzie apologized, said she was sorry, that she didn't know, that she felt awful. I said I appreciated the apology, but words were easy. I said because of what she did, coworkers saw my salary. My boss saw it. People I'd worked with for a decade now knew exactly how much I made and watched strangers mock me for it online. I said that kind of humiliation didn't just disappear because she said sorry. She asked what she could do to fix it, and I said I'd been thinking about it all night. I had a plan. She wasn't going to like it, but she was going to understand exactly what that salary paid for by experiencing what life felt like without it. Starting immediately and learning what it meant to live on $18.40 an hour. The color drained from Mackenzie's face. She asked what I meant, and I explained that for the next 3 months, she'd be involved in running this household, seeing every bill, every expense, every financial decision, helping me budget, helping me plan meals around sales and coupons, helping me decide what we could afford and what we couldn't. She was going to get a job. She tried to protest that she had cheer in school and friends. I reminded her that I had work and bills and a kid to raise and still managed to fit it all in. I said she could keep her commitment to cheer, but on weekends, she wasn't at competitions. She'd be working. I'd already looked into it. The ice cream shop down the street from her cheer gym was hiring. They paid $11.50 an hour to start, which would give her first-hand understanding of exactly how long it took to earn the money she spent so freely. Mackenzie sat with that information for a long moment. I could see her calculating, weighing her options, wondering if she could argue her way out of it. Then she surprised me. She nodded slowly and said, "Okay." Said she deserved it. Said she didn't understand what she was doing when she posted that screenshot, that it was just supposed to be funny, that all her friends complained about their parents online and she wanted to fit in. Said it was a terrible excuse, but at least it was honest. Fitting in mattered to teenagers. I remembered being 16, but some things mattered more than fitting in, and basic respect for the person keeping you alive was one of them. That afternoon, we walked together to the ice cream shop, where I helped her fill out the application. The manager, a tired-looking woman named Sandra, asked Mackenzie about availability and experience. Mackenzie admitted she had none, that this was her first job, and I watched her squirm with discomfort at having to ask a stranger for a chance. Sandra looked at me, then at Mackenzie, and said she could start next weekend. $11.50 an hour. Weekends only to start. 3-hour shifts. Mackenzie would make maybe $69 a week before taxes. I wanted her to understand how small that number was compared to everything she consumed. On the walk home, Mackenzie was quiet. She kept checking her phone, but the frantic scrolling she was used to wasn't there. She was just staring at the screen, maybe reading the remaining comments on her post, which still existed even though the original had disappeared. The first week was brutal for both of us. I made Mackenzie sit with me while I paid bills online, showing her exactly how I prioritized expenses. Rent first, always, because without housing, nothing else mattered. Then utilities, then the car payment, then insurance. Food and gas were flexible because I could adjust them based on what was left. She watched the numbers in our checking account drop as each payment processed. By the end of the list, there was $127 left until my next paycheck in 6 days. She asked what happened if something unexpected came up. The car breaking down, one of us getting sick. I showed her the emergency fund I'd been building for years. $840 total, saved in a separate account that I touched only for real emergencies. She looked at that number and her face crumpled again. Her iPhone had cost more than my entire safety net. I let her sit with that realization because it mattered. Most people didn't have a cushion to fall back on. Most people were one disaster away from losing everything. Mackenzie's first shift at the ice cream shop was the following Saturday. She came home after 3 hours with aching feet, a headache, and $34.50 before taxes. She'd scooped ice cream and wiped down tables and smiled at customers, who were sometimes rude because service workers were invisible to certain kinds of people. She collapsed on the couch, still wearing her apron, and I asked how it went. She said it was hard, said she never realized how demanding customers could be, how much energy it took to stay pleasant when someone was complaining that the cone was melting too fast or the scoop was too small. Said one woman left a mess at her table and no tip, and Mackenzie had to clean it up while the woman laughed with her friends on the way out. I said, "Welcome to my world, times 100. Because at least the customers at your shop can walk and talk and feed themselves. The patients I care for are often confused, sometimes combative, frequently in pain. I've been hit, kicked, scratched, and yelled at. I've held the hands of people taking their last breaths while their families cried in the hallway, and I do all of it for $18.40 an hour." Mackenzie looked at me differently after that first shift. Something had shifted behind her eyes. The meme 2 weeks into the experiment, Mackenzie asked if she could invite Paige over. I said yes, but warned her that things would be different than usual. We weren't ordering pizza or doing Uber Eats. If she wanted to feed her friend, she could help me make dinner out of what we had in the kitchen. Mackenzie agreed, which surprised me, and she actually seemed nervous about it. Paige showed up around 5 p.m., a pretty girl with expensive highlights and designer jeans and the kind of effortless confidence that came from never worrying about money. She looked around our apartment with an expression I couldn't quite decode, taking in the secondhand furniture and the small TV in the kitchen where nothing matched. Mackenzie gave a quick tour that lasted about 30 seconds, because there wasn't much to tour. Then we went back to the kitchen, where I was teaching Mackenzie how to stretch a pound of ground beef into a meal that would feed 4, adding rice and beans and frozen vegetables. Paige watched us cook with obvious confusion. She asked why we didn't just order something, and Mackenzie explained that we were saving money. Paige seemed to expect it was a joke. When she realized it wasn't, she went quiet. Dinner was awkward. Paige picked at her food and kept checking her phone, probably texting other friends about how weird this was. Mackenzie ate everything on her plate without complaint, which was new. After dinner, they went to Mackenzie's room and I could hear them talking through the door. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but the apartment was small and voices carried. Paige was asking why Mackenzie had been so weird lately, why she never wanted to go to the mall anymore, why she'd gotten a job at an ice cream shop instead of just asking her mom for money. Mackenzie's voice was harder to hear, but I caught fragments. She was explaining about the bills, the budget, how much things actually cost. Paige's response was dismissive, Something about how all parents were dramatic about money but always figured it out. I heard Mackenzie's voice get louder, defending me for the first time in years. She said her mom worked harder than anyone she knew and didn't deserve to be mocked. There was silence after that, and then Paige made an excuse about needing to get home early. She left without saying goodbye to me. Mackenzie came out of her room looking upset, but also something else. Something like pride. The next day at school, Mackenzie texted me during lunch, which was unusual because she almost never initiated contact during school hours. The message said, "Some people are talking about that post about your salary. They're saying things." My stomach dropped. I asked what kind of things, and she sent a screenshot. Someone had turned my pay stub into a meme, adding the caption, "POV, your mom peaked as a butt wiper." The comment section was full of laughing emojis and people tagging their friends. I sat in the hospital break room, looking at that image of my own financial information turned into a joke, and I felt something crack in my chest. Not break. Crack. Like a window with a rock through it spreading in every direction. Renata found me there 10 minutes later, still staring at my phone. She asked if I needed to talk to HR again, if there was anything the hospital could do. I shook my head because there was nothing anyone could do. Once something was on the internet, it existed forever. I would always be the nursing assistant with the embarrassing salary to anyone who'd seen that post. But Mackenzie did something unexpected. She texted me again that afternoon. I fixed it. I didn't know what that meant until I got home and she showed me her phone. She'd posted her own response video to the meme, standing in her room, no makeup, hair messy, looking directly at the camera. In the video, she explained that she was the one who originally posted that pay stub, and it was the worst thing she'd ever done. She talked about what she'd learned over the past 2 weeks about her mother's actual financial reality. She talked about how nursing assistants were essential workers who kept hospitals running while being chronically underpaid. She talked about the patients her mother cared for, the shifts she worked, the sacrifices she made. She said her mother wasn't embarrassing. She said her mother was a hero, and she apologized publicly. Not just to me, but to every service worker who'd ever been mocked for their income. The video already had 12,000 views. The comments were different this time. People sharing their own stories of underpaid work, people defending nursing assistants and caregivers, people calling Mackenzie brave for admitting she was wrong. It wasn't a fix. It didn't erase what happened, but it was something. First Paycheck Week 4 brought a new challenge. Mackenzie got her first paycheck from the ice cream shop, $92.40 after taxes for 12 hours of work across 4 shifts. She held that piece of paper and stared at it like she couldn't believe the number was real. She'd imagined that working meant instant money, easy money, a simple trade of time for cash. The reality was devastating. She'd spent more than that on a single makeup palette she bought last month. She'd spent more than that on the DoorDash order she made the week before the salary post when she ordered Thai food delivered because she didn't feel like heating up leftovers. I let her sit with those comparisons before asking what she wanted to do with the money. She thought about it for a long time, then said she wanted to put half in savings and use the other half to help with groceries. I almost cried. I didn't cry because I'd been practicing not crying for 16 years, but my eyes got wet enough for Mackenzie to notice. She hugged me, something she almost never did anymore, and said she was so sorry that she had no idea, that she wished she'd understood sooner. I hugged her back and felt something that had been tight in my chest for years start to loosen, just a little. But financial education wasn't the only consequence of her post. The viral nature of that original screenshot had reached people I'd hoped would never see it. Travis, Mackenzie's father, texted me for the first time in 3 years. He said he'd heard about the situation and wanted to help. I laughed out loud at my phone. Travis, who left when Mackenzie was 4. Travis, who paid child support sporadically when he felt like it, who owed me over $16,000 in back payments the court never enforced. Travis, who remarried a woman with money and now lived in a house with a pool while his daughter and I got by in a 2-bedroom apartment. He wanted to help now that our struggle had become public entertainment. I told him where he could put his help, using words I rarely used and blocked the number. Mackenzie saw my reaction and asked what was wrong. I showed her the message. Her face went through a complicated series of expressions: anger, hurt, and something that looked like longing. She missed her father, even though he'd abandoned her. Kids always did. I said he wasn't worth missing, but I knew that didn't help. School trouble. The school situation escalated the following week. Mackenzie came home with a notice that she'd been called to the counselor's office. Apparently, some parents had complained that the original salary post constituted cyberbullying, and the school wanted to investigate. I went with her to the meeting, sitting in a small office across from a counselor named Mr. Bellamy, who seemed uncomfortable with the whole situation. He explained that although the post had been directed at me and not another student, several parents felt it created a hostile environment by mocking someone's income level. They wanted Mackenzie to face disciplinary action. I asked what kind of action. He said they were considering a 3-day suspension. My blood went cold. A suspension would go on Mackenzie's record. It could affect college applications. It would punish her for something she'd already publicly apologized for, something she was actively trying to fix. I looked at Mr. Bellamy and asked if the complaining parents were the same ones whose kids had reposted the meme, who'd laughed at it, who'd made additional jokes at my expense. He shifted in his chair and admitted the situation was complicated. I made a decision in that moment. I asked Mr. Bellamy for 1 day to prepare a response before any disciplinary action was taken. He agreed, seeming relieved to delay the conversation. That night, I sat down and wrote a letter to the school board. In it, I detailed everything that had happened since the original post. I described the immediate humiliation. I described my workplace finding out. I described the meme that followed. But I also described what Mackenzie had done since: the apology video, the ice cream shop job, the financial education she was going through, the genuine remorse she'd shown. I argued that suspending her now would punish growth and accountability, the exact things we should be encouraging in teenagers. I sent the letter to the principal, the counselor, and every school board member whose email I could find. Then I waited. 3 days later, Mr. Bellamy called to say the investigation was closed with no suspension, no disciplinary action. The parents who complained were informed that Mackenzie had already taken responsibility and was actively making amends. One of them even reached out to me directly, apologizing for jumping to judgment and saying her own daughter had shared the meme and should have faced consequences too. Small victories. I was learning to appreciate them. The cheer competition month 2 brought unexpected complications. Mackenzie was working every weekend at the ice cream shop, getting better at scooping, earning tips for the first time, learning to handle difficult customers without losing her composure. But then cheer competition season arrived, and everything collided. There was a regional competition 4 hours away that required hotel accommodations and travel expenses. Total cost: $410 for registration, uniforms, and lodging. Mackenzie hadn't asked me for anything since the salary post. She'd been using her ice cream money to buy her own small luxuries instead of expecting me to provide. But this was different. It was her passion, the one extracurricular she'd begged to do since she was 8. She came to me with the competition paperwork, not demanding, but asking, her voice small. She said she understood if we couldn't afford it, said she could skip this one if necessary, said she knew now what that money represented, how many hours of work it translated to, what sacrifices it would take to earn it. I looked at the forms in her hands and thought about everything she'd learned over the past few weeks. The financial lessons had sunk in. She genuinely understood now. I said we'd figure it out together. We sat down with the budget and looked for places to cut. She suggested canceling the streaming service she used the most. That saved $14. She suggested buying generic brands instead of name brands for the next month. That could save another $30 to $40. She suggested she could pick up an extra shift or two at the shop over the next few weeks. I pointed out that extra shifts meant less time together, more exhaustion for her, more stress for both of us. She said she wanted to earn part of the money herself. She wanted to pay for her own registration with her ice cream earnings, even if it took all her savings. Watching her do the math, figuring out she'd need 5 more shifts just to cover the registration fee, I felt proud in a way I hadn't felt in a long time. This was what I wanted her to understand. Not that money grew on trees, but that it grew from work, from sacrifice, from choices made every day. We agreed on the plan. She'd cover registration, I'd cover the hotel and travel, and we'd both cut back for the next month to make it work. The competition fell on a weekend in late May. We drove the 4 hours together, something we hadn't done in years without arguing. The scenery shifted from urban to rural, shopping centers giving way to farmland and small towns. Mackenzie controlled the music for the first half, then let me pick for the second half. We talked about things we'd never discussed before. Her anxiety about junior year approaching, my own memories of high school, which were messier than I'd ever admitted to her hopes for college, which had always felt abstract but now felt more real because she understood what it would cost and was already thinking about scholarships and financial aid. I told her about my own abandoned college dreams, how I'd started a nursing program at 20 but dropped out when I got pregnant with her, how I always meant to go back but life kept getting in the way. She asked why I'd never told her that. I said, because I didn't want you to feel like you ruined my plans. The silence after that admission lasted several miles. At the competition, I watched Mackenzie perform with her team. They were good, really good, moving in perfect sync to music I didn't recognize, but that made my heart race anyway. When they finished, Mackenzie's face was flushed and happy in a way I hadn't seen in months. This was what I worked for. This was what the overtime paid for. These moments when my daughter could chase something she loved, could be excellent at something, could feel the joy of accomplishment. They placed second overall. Not first, but still a trophy and a ribbon and proud photos with the coach. On the drive back, Mackenzie held that trophy in her lap and talked excitedly about what they'd do differently next time, which moves they'd perfect, how they'd take first place at the next competition. Then she stopped mid-sentence and looked at me. She said, "Thank you, not just for this trip, but for every trip. Every uniform, every class over the years." She said she finally understood what it meant, what I'd made possible. She said she'd never forget again. The fallout continues. But the consequences of the original post weren't finished unfolding. 2 weeks after the competition, I was called to HR again. This time it wasn't Renata delivering the news, but a corporate woman I'd never met, someone with a tight smile and a tablet full of documentation. She explained that the hospital was implementing new social media policies in response to recent incidents. Employees and family members could no longer post identifying information about the hospital, including pay stubs, badges, scrubs, or facility names. Violating this policy could result in termination. I pointed out that I hadn't posted anything, that my daughter had done it without my knowledge or consent. The HR woman acknowledged that, but said the policy was being applied across the board. She said I wasn't in trouble, but I should be aware of the consequences going forward. She handed me a document to sign, confirming I understood the new policy. I signed it with shaking hands, feeling like I'd narrowly escaped termination that wouldn't have been fair, but would have been legal. Mackenzie felt terrible when I told her about the HR meeting. She said she hadn't thought about my job being at risk, only about getting attention online. She said that was the problem with internet culture. Everything felt consequence-free because you were sitting in your room tapping buttons on your phone. But real people lived on the other side of those posts. Real lives that could be destroyed by a joke that stopped being funny. She asked what she could do to fix it, and I said there was nothing left to fix. The damage was done. The policy was in place. All we could do was move forward and be more careful. She nodded and went to her room. Through the door, I could hear her crying again. Part of me felt bad for being so direct. Part of me knew she needed to understand the full weight of what she'd done. 16 was old enough to reckon with consequences. Growth summer arrived, and with it a change in Mackenzie I almost didn't recognize. She'd been promoted to shift lead at the ice cream shop, earning $13.75 an hour now instead of $11.50. She worked 20 hours a week and saved more than she spent. She took over grocery shopping duties, comparing prices and using coupons I'd taught her to find online. When her friends wanted to go to an expensive concert, she calculated the cost and decided it wasn't worth it, choosing instead to have them over for movie night at the apartment. Paige stopped coming around entirely. Mackenzie said they'd drifted apart, that Paige didn't understand her anymore, that talking to someone who'd never worked a day in her life felt frustrating. New friendships formed with coworkers from the shop, kids who understood what it meant to earn your own money, who didn't mock anyone for what their parents did for a living. The change was subtle, but profound. My daughter was becoming someone different, someone more aware, someone kinder. But the past has a way of reaching back. In July, Travis showed up at our apartment unannounced. He'd tracked down our address somehow, probably through Mackenzie's school records, which he technically still had access to. I came home from a shift to find him sitting on the front steps of the building, looking older than I remembered, grayer and thicker around the middle. He stood up when he saw me and started talking immediately, not even letting me get my keys out. He said he wanted to reconnect with Mackenzie, said he'd seen her video online, the one where she apologized, and it made him think about what kind of father he'd been. Said his marriage had ended and he was reevaluating his priorities. Said he wanted to make things right. I stood there in my scrubs, exhausted from a 12-hour shift, and laughed. I asked where this desire to make things right had been for the last 12 years. I asked about the $16,000 in back child support he'd never paid. I asked about the birthdays he missed, the holidays he forgot, the cheer showcase he promised to attend and then skipped. He had excuses for everything: stress at work, his ex-wife controlling him, depression, distance. None of it mattered. Mackenzie heard us talking from her bedroom window, came downstairs and stood beside me, looking at her father with an expression I couldn't decode. Travis brightened when he saw her, moving toward her with his arms open for a hug. She stepped back and crossed her arms. She asked why he was here. He gave the same speech he'd given me about reconnecting, about making things right. She listened silently, then asked a question. "Do you know how much cheer competitions cost?" He blinked, confused by the non sequitur. She told him, listed the registration fees, the uniforms, the travel, the hotels. She said her mom paid for all of it every year on $18.40 an hour. She said she posted that salary online to mock it and was wrong, because that salary gave everything, while his much larger income gave nothing. Travis's face went through confusion, then embarrassment, then anger. He said he didn't come here to be attacked. Mackenzie said she hadn't asked him to come. He left without another word, and we watched him go together. She reached for my hand as his car pulled away, and I squeezed it tight. Anniversary August brought the anniversary of the original post. I didn't consciously realize it, but my body remembered, waking me at 2 a.m. with my heart racing. I got up and walked to the kitchen for water and found Mackenzie already there, sitting at the table in the dark. She looked up when I walked in and said she couldn't sleep either. We sat together in silence for a while. Two people who'd gone through something hard together and come out different on the other side. She asked if I'd forgiven her. I thought about it carefully before answering. I said forgiveness was complicated. Said I understood now that she'd been young and careless, not malicious. Said I'd watched her grow more in the last 4 months than in the 4 years before that. Said I was proud of who she was becoming. But I also said some hurts didn't heal all the way, that I would always remember the humiliation of watching my salary mocked by thousands of strangers, that the scar tissue would always be there, even if the wound had closed. She said she felt like she understood, said she didn't expect me to forgive her completely. She just wanted me to know she'd never stop feeling sorry. The new school year started with junior year, and Mackenzie approached it differently than she'd approached anything before. She signed up for an economics elective because she wanted to understand money better. She joined the school's financial literacy club because she wanted to help other kids avoid her mistakes. She kept the ice cream shop job even though it meant less free time, and managed her schedule with a maturity that impressed even her teachers. Mr. Bellamy, the counselor who almost suspended her, stopped me one day at a school event. He said Mackenzie had turned into one of the most responsible students he'd seen. He said whatever I'd done had worked. I didn't tell him the whole story. I just said she'd learned some hard lessons. He nodded like he understood, though he couldn't possibly understand it all. Nobody could, who hadn't lived through those months of embarrassment and growth and painful conversations. Mackenzie's video about my salary kept circulating, finding new audiences as the school year progressed. Other teenagers reached out to her, saying they'd done similar things, mocked their parents online for cheap laughs. She started responding, sharing what she'd learned, encouraging them to apologize and do better. Without meaning to, she'd become a sort of advocate for treating parents with respect, for understanding the financial realities adults navigated invisibly. A local community access TV show invited her to talk about the experience, and I drove her to the studio to record the segment. I sat in the waiting area, listening through the window as she told the story with a self-awareness that made my chest tighten. She didn't make excuses. She owned what she did, explained the consequences and the lessons. When the host asked if she had regrets beyond the obvious, she said she wished she'd learned sooner. Said she wished every teenager could work a minimum wage job for a month before being allowed on social media. The host laughed, but Mackenzie was serious. The segment got some traction online, reaching people well beyond our small town. I got messages from other parents sharing similar stories. Teenagers who'd humiliated them online and then were horrified by the consequences. Some asked what I did to turn things around, and I told them about the budget sessions, the job requirements, the brutal honesty about our financial situation. Not everyone agreed with my approach. Some said I was too harsh, that teenagers didn't need to understand adult problems, that I'd parentified my daughter by making her worry about bills. I disagreed but didn't argue. Every family was different. Every kid needed different lessons. Mackenzie needed to see the reality of our lives to understand her place in them. That might not be true for every teenager, but it was true for her. The proof was in how she changed. Full circle. The holidays that year felt different than any I remembered. Mackenzie insisted on helping with Thanksgiving dinner, researching recipes that used affordable ingredients, planning a menu that would stretch across multiple meals. She invited her coworkers from the ice cream shop, since many of them didn't have big family gatherings to attend. The apartment was full in a way it hadn't been in years. Young people laughing and eating and playing cards in the living room. I watched from the kitchen doorway. This life I built on $18.40 an hour, and I felt something close to peace. The money would never be enough. The struggle would never fully end. But we had what mattered. Each other. Community. A shared understanding of what it took to survive. Mackenzie caught me watching and smiled in a way that reached her eyes. She came over and hugged me in front of everyone, whispering that she loved me. I whispered it back, holding tight against the world. Winter brought college preparation and the inevitable conversations about costs. Mackenzie had realistic expectations now, knowing exactly what she could contribute and what she'd need to cover through loans, scholarships, and work study. We researched schools together, ruling out the expensive private universities she'd once dreamed of, focusing instead on state schools with strong programs and reasonable tuition. She applied for every scholarship she could find, writing essays about financial literacy, about learning from mistakes, about understanding the value of work. Her grades were strong, her extracurriculars solid. Her story, painful as it was, had become strength. It transformed 16 years of ignorance and 4 months of brutal awakening into compelling personal statements that admissions officers couldn't ignore. The acceptance letters arrived in March. 4 schools wanted her. 2 offered partial scholarships. A state university with a strong business program offered enough aid that she could graduate with minimal debt if she worked part-time and lived frugally. We cried together when we read that letter, sitting at the same kitchen table where I'd first shown her the reality of our finances. She kept touching the paper like she couldn't believe it was real. This future that opened up because she'd learned to see beyond herself. I thought about all the hours I worked, all the meals I skipped, all the new clothes I never bought. It added up to this moment, this letter, this daughter, who would go further than I ever had. The salary she mocked had built the foundation for her to stand on. 6 months after the original post that destroyed and then rebuilt our relationship, Mackenzie gave a speech at the school's financial literacy fair. I sat in the audience with other parents, many of whom I recognized from meetings I'd attended over the years. Some had seen the original salary post. Some had probably laughed at it. Now they were watching my daughter explain the difference between needs and wants, between gross and net income, between building credit and destroying it. She used our story as a case study, anonymizing details but making the lessons clear. Teenagers needed to understand that their parents' work translated directly into their comfort. Mockery had real consequences. Gratitude wasn't optional. When she finished, the applause was genuine. Parents came up to me afterward, saying they wished their kids had half the maturity Mackenzie had developed. I wanted to say that maturity came from pain, from mistakes, from hitting bottom and choosing to climb back up. But I just smiled and said thank you. The day before Mackenzie left for college, we sat together in the living room of our small apartment. She'd packed everything she owned into boxes waiting by the door. The Nissan was loaded with bedding and clothes and the mini fridge we'd bought secondhand. We weren't fighting, weren't crying, just sitting. Mother and daughter, in the home where she'd grown up, despite everything working against us. She asked if I remembered what I'd said that first day when I showed her all the bills. I said I remembered every word. She said she'd been thinking about it lately, about how that conversation changed the entire trajectory of her life. She said if she hadn't posted that screenshot, she might have floated through high school oblivious, gone to college expecting someone else to pay for everything, struggled when reality finally hit her. She said in a twisted way she was grateful for the mistake because it forced her to grow. I said that was a very mature perspective. I also said don't recommend public humiliation as a growth strategy. The morning she left, we hugged in the dorm parking lot while other families unloaded their own cars around us. Some of those parents drove brand new SUVs loaded with brand new furniture. Some of those kids had never worked a day in their lives. Mackenzie looked at that without envy, just recognition. She'd chosen a different path, paved with ice cream shop shifts and budget spreadsheets and a deep understanding of what things actually cost. When we finally let go, she said she'd call every Sunday. I told her to take care of herself, to maybe buy some new clothes, to consider spending some of the money she usually spent on me on herself instead. I laughed and said old habits were hard to break, but I promised to try. She walked toward the dorm building, carrying everything she needed, everything I'd been able to give her, everything she'd learned to earn on her own. I drove home alone in the Nissan, 138,000 miles and counting, passing the hospital where I'd work my next shift in 2 days, passing the ice cream shop where Mackenzie became someone new, passing all the ordinary places where our extraordinary year had unfolded. 3 years later, Mackenzie graduated with honors and a job offer from a financial planning firm that specialized in helping low-income families build wealth. She turned our experience into a career, my salary into her mission. At her graduation dinner, paid for with her own signing bonus, she raised her glass and toasted the woman who taught her everything she knew about money, by showing her how hard it was to earn, how easy it was to waste, and how much it meant when someone gave out of love instead of obligation. I looked at my daughter across that restaurant table, this adult who'd emerged from the ashes of a viral post, and felt the weight of 16 years lift off my shoulders. The salary wasn't embarrassing anymore. It never had been. It was proof of survival, of persistence, of a mother who worked harder than anyone would ever know to give her daughter a chance. Mackenzie understood that now. So did I. When we left the restaurant that night, walking through the parking lot toward our separate cars, because she owned her own now, she turned and said something I'd never forget. That $18.40 an hour bought everything I am. I drove home through streets that looked the same as they always had, but somehow felt different, lighter. Like the weight of survival had finally transformed into something closer to victory.